3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I farted.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely
Ready?
I can move you. Making reveal. Making reveal.
Say 6,
6,
5,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
OMG, listeners. You are now tuning in to the 40th episode of Rank and Review. And this episode, Matthew Risling is returning for the third time to discuss ghosts. I'm really happy that we've made it to the 40th episode, and I'm going to keep on pressing on. I would love to hear more feedback from you. We are on Facebook. We are on iTunes. I'm going to work on the Twitter thing, but I'm not a Twitter guy yet. I'm getting there. But I just wanted to thank everybody for listening to the show and just ask them, especially in celebration of the 40th episode, to get the word out there on Rank and Review. As usual, this episode is going to contain spoilers for the 6 movies discussed, and it is going to have coarse language. If you would like to send your feedback to me, please do so. You can do that at rankandreview@gmail.com and visit our website at rankandreview.ca. Check it out, look at an alphabetical listing of all the movies we reviewed, and listen to some old episodes, skip past down memory lane, and just drink it in. Sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 40 of Rank and Review. This is actually the 40th episode. The last time Mr. Risling was here was the 30th episode. And we were also talking about ghosts.
Yeah, I'm important for the milestones. So I
Yeah.
should be here for the 50th and the 100th for sure.
I was trying to think of this, like this could be called Ghost Volume 4, but do we have like a strong enough theme that it could have a subtitle so that we could work with? And why always ghosts with you?
Oh, I love ghosts. Although, at some point, I guess I should move on.
Well, hey, whatever you want, whatever floats your boat as far as I'm concerned, but...
This one especially, my last 2 guest appearances, I spent complaining about all the awful movies that you gave me. So I thought it would be good to for your listeners to know that I don't actually hate movies and ghost movies.
You don't hate all movies, right? Yeah. There's a reason that you do watch ghost movies, and you do like some of them. And hopefully 1 or 2 of them might be haunting this list.
Well, I would say that the obviously worst movie on this list was only, say, 10% better than the best movie on the last list.
That's still an improvement. I'll take that.
No, that's a huge improvement.
Yeah. You could just be my ghost guy. I know I did 1 episode with Matt Burgess, but as long as whoever I'm talking to is named Matt, I could just refer to you.
Yeah.
That's what you're either Matthew Risling or your name is Matthew. Otherwise, you don't cover any of the ghost ones.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That seems reasonable.
Yeah, except for Jeremy might be doing kind of a ghosty one soon.
Musical ghosts.
Sort of. Is there anything you want to say before I list off these movies and we get started?
Maybe an apology to people out there in the internet for the fact that I have a cold that just won't go away. So if there's coughing and sniffling and my voice is echoey,
if Matt is particularly sexy sounding this episode.
Well, it does sort of give me a deep, sexy voice.
Indeed. I can maybe chipmunk you up a little bit in the end too, if you want.
So yeah, I'll try to talk slower so that when you speed up the reel.
Okay, the 6 ghost movies we're going to look at this time. We have the adaptation of the Richard Matheson novel Hell House, The Legend of Hell House from the 70s. We have the much more recent film The Haunting in Connecticut. And we have the 80s classic ghost epic, which you've mentioned both times you've been on the show, and now we're actually going to review.
Yeah, first horror
Poltergeist.
movie I've ever seen, the first movie to really traumatize me.
So today's the day we finally get that taken care of. The Thai West haunted hotel film Innkeepers. The American remake from the director of all those Pirates of the Caribbean movies, Gore Verbinski, The Ring. And last but not least, from Guillermo del Toro, one of Larry's faves, The Devil's Backbone, a sort of companion movie or brother-sister movie to Pan's Labyrinth, as Guillermo has called it.
When did this come out in relation to Pan's Labyrinth? Was it like a year?
It was almost 5 or 6 years, I think, at least, between the two movies.
Oh, wow.
I think that he came and did, like, Mimic and Blade 2 and a couple of his first American movies, and then went back and did this Devil's Backbone. Very similar themes as in Pan's Labyrinth, but in framework of a much more classic ghost story. But we're going to get there.
Right.
I can tether the movies together from one sort of plot beat to another, but I don't know if there's an overarching theme other than people are going to be dealing with supernatural.
Well, I mean, why not ghosts that are better than the previous 6 ghost movies?
Ghost 4, the better one?
Yeah.
What in the name of God? What did he do to make this house so evil?
Murder, vampirism, cannibalism, drug addiction, alcoholism, sadism, mutilation.
How did it end?
If it had ended, we would not be here.
In the past, on this very podcast, if you have listened to them, as you said, you've heard me sing the praises of Richard Matheson. And I'm familiar with the novel that this adaptation is based off of Hell House. And I'm hesitant to admit, Richard Matheson himself adapted the screenplay.
Oh, wow.
The thing is that my problem going into it, other than sort of this sort of stilted 70s nature of the movie and the high melodrama associated throughout it, is that in adapting his own novel, I think Matheson might have become his worst enemy.
How's that? I'm not familiar with the novel.
Well, he still tried to keep to some of the pseudo-sexual angles. There's the wife of the doctor who has the sleepwalking and is very seductive. But
yeah, I'm curious about why you would say pseudo-sexual.
Well,
she
in the book, she's a much more frail, sort of less sexual figure. Like, she's not as, like, super attractive right out of the gate. And there's a theme throughout the movie, with almost all of the characters, of ugly sexuality, because the house was the place of these, like, orgies and this demonic rituals and all this stuff. And it seemed like he sort of pulled the dirty bits out of the movie and sort of just kept the very basic ghost framework. And it hurt the story for me.
No, now, before I get on, because I kind of disagree with that. I mean, we do have a ghost raping a woman.
That's true.
And the wife dropping her clothes a couple of times for Roddy McDowell. But maybe we should start by plotting it up.
Sure. A scientist who is very interested in parapsychology and the ghost phenomenon is hired by a rich, dying millionaire to prove within a week whether there is life after death. And he's going to do so by going to this infamous haunted house, for which an investigation that had happened in 1959 had rendered everyone there either dead or crazy.
Right.
So this ragtag group, the scientist, sort of skeptical scientist figure, this sort of young, beautiful psychic, and the one lone survivor who still has a few marbles rolling around in his head, played by Roddy McDowell, who is just hilariously melodramatic throughout the entire movie.
I kind of liked him in it. I mean, I didn't mind his melodrama, honestly. I thought it played very well against the stiff upper lip doctor, whom I thought... I mean, it's a British movie from the early 70s, which means late 60s. If they tried that character today, it would read totally false, but because it was kind of a period piece, I bought it, and I was really amused by him. But I thought the Roddy McDowell, he played it up a little bit, but it worked together with that stuffiness.
It seemed like there was so many dramatic proclamations, like, per scene. And so many answers like, Or is it? Do you? Are we safe? Are we? You know, like all of these, like it's punctuated like that so often that it actually sort of becomes funny to me.
Yeah.
And when I'm snickering to myself, it kind of kills the spooky atmosphere of this Velasco house, which in the book is very richly sort of detailed, sort of the debauched history of it. And because he can't get into that sort of just detail in the background, it's just sort of left behind us. To the point where Roddy McDowall, when he finally spills out the events of it, it just seems completely random that he knows all of this information, right? He just spills out the plot because that's the narrative of the story that we don't get as background in the movie, but exists throughout the novel.
Yeah, actually one of my notes for it is that there's the characters do a lot of expositioning to themselves.
Right.
Like there's a big dump of exposition towards the beginning when they all get into the house and they are quizzing Roddy McDowall on
The events
things
of the
that
previous
he knows.
haunting, yeah.
And I actually thought that was a little bit of a missed opportunity because I got the idea from the movie that the book must have been really interesting and the reveal must have been really good. We learn at the end something about the fact that Mr. Belasco had fake legs, so he wasn't a giant. And things sort of made sense retrospectively, but only sort of, because it was sort of mentioned offhandedly that he was tall, but
yeah.
I think in the book that's probably really important.
He's known as this giant. He's got this sinister reputation of being this very intimidating man who can get anyone to do anything, right?
Yeah.
He corrupts anybody he touches, type of this powerful figure, and really he's just a sad little man.
Yeah, and they rush through that a little bit.
Yeah, and when I talk about sort of the weird sexual angle, because it's more graphically explored in the house, particularly the wife character, there is a coldness in that relationship. They're not sleeping together. She tags along, and you get the feeling like he would have just assumed she hadn't.
Yeah.
It's one of those relationships where she seems to need him more than he needs her.
Yeah, and sorry, are you talking about the book? Because that came through in the movie.
This is what I'm talking about in the book, but in the book she's a much more, at least I picture her, a much more sort of plain Jane, sort of quirky librarian, awkward chick, than she's sort of played very beautifully in the movie. Her turnaround, she sort of gets really threatened by this beautiful psychic, and she has to do, there's this really horrible scene where she has to do this strip search on the psychic woman because the doctor in the seeking scientific absolute clarity that no tricks are being pulled, he asks his wife to strip search basically this other woman, and she gets turned on by that. She sort of is sexually ignited by that, and her transformation just doesn't seem to happen in the movie. She just always seems like a sexual figure to me.
Yeah, I think she might have actually been miscast because she was cast by a very 1960s sexual woman of a certain age, like later 30s, early 40s.
Vaguely aggressive, if that makes sense.
she wouldn't look out of place in like an Avengers style catsuit.
Yeah.
Like she had that look about her.
But yeah, I just didn't feel that character come through, and that sort of ugliness to the house. It's mentioned, it's talked about, but I don't really feel it in the characters. I don't feel their transformations.
No, another one of my notes is that none of the characters really seemed scared enough of the house. None of them really seemed to have a problem going to spooky places by themselves. And the way it started really well, I thought it did a good job of getting to the point. I think they were in the haunted house before the credits
were done. Yeah.
So that was quite efficient. And when they first got there, the one psychic wouldn't go into the chapel, and so I got the idea that this would be a house where there's certain rooms that are really foreboding and
will be built up towards.
Yeah, and it didn't really happen. Everybody seemed okay sleeping alone in those giant, quite Edwardian. There's no name for the era after Edwardian, but whatever. The house was built in the 1920s, but it's that big manor-type house where there are obviously ghosts in every spooky room. And even when they're getting attacked by ghosts, people are kind of cool sleeping in their own cells.
That goes to that sort of common, they're constantly either overreacting to atmosphere or underreacting to legitimate spooky events. And that does become funny to me after a while. They watch this physical manifestation in this psychic making this shape come out of her fingers, this ectoplasm, like fairly conclusive something hinky supernatural. And yeah, like you say, everyone's sipping tea and it's fine.
Or like the psychic Florence Tanner
Yeah.
getting attacked by a cat in a scene that the cat looked a little bit silly after a while because a lot of the shots were like they were throwing a stuffed cat at her,
Yes.
obviously. But I didn't mind. I forgave it because of when it was made. But she had some serious cuts all over her body. And then she's like, yeah,
I'm fine.
yeah, that'll be good. I'm still sleeping alone in my room in the haunted house tonight.
Um,
They did do a good job of keeping her in the house. Like they gave her a good motivation to be there in so much as she thought she was doing God's work. And
Indeed.
this was an important thing. So I didn't call bullshit on... I came closest to calling bullshit on Roddy McDowell staying in the house, but he was actually sort of campaigning to get them out.
Yeah. He felt because he could shut himself off psychic, if he's not using his powers, that he will, just be able to wait out the clock, collect his check, and, retire, hopefully.
Right, and he also says to them that the house doesn't mind visitors, but you can't be screwing with it. That's when it's going to get you.
I think that, and this is something that is guilty of in the book as well, there's something pretty obvious of the fact, getting towards the end of the book, the movie and spoilers, that Florence is killed by the cross, and the scientist is killed by his machines.
Right.
They're both right and they're both wrong simultaneously, and they both sort of pay the price with their lives for their refusal to hear the other side.
Sir, did you think that was on the nose? I thought that was not bad.
Yeah.
Like, there was a certain... It wasn't really obvious about it. Like, well, I mean, it was, I suppose, that she got...
She was crushed by the huge cross, and his machines. He
But
worshipped
she
the
didn't
machines,
die-
she worshipped the cross, right?
She didn't die on the floor with her arms splayed out like
No.
Jesus Christ or something, and, I don't know what the equivalent would be with him getting blown up in the machine, but I thought they handled that relatively well, in the same way that...
And the fact that she actually wrote the Belasco and the bee in blood, trying to, tell everyone actually she was wrong about this whole Velasco's son thing. She had been misled. She was willing to concede that, even though it took her death to make it happen.
Right, for listeners out in Radioland, she thought, and they all thought there were a bunch of ghosts, and Belasco was like the general and making them do stuff.
Yeah.
And so the reason why the Christian psychic was trying to stay, not so much to redeem the evil ghost, but to rescue his son, whom she thought was being tormented by him.
And that's where it gets really ugly, especially in the book, where this ghost pesters her every night that he wants to make love to her, and that would be the thing that would set her free. And she resists and resists and resists. And finally, when she lets it in, is when things go really bad for her. And in the book, it actually manifests as a rotting corpse while they're mid-coitus.
Oh,
it's
wow.
quite horrible.
In the movie, you can tell that there's a realization halfway through where it turns from kind of unpleasant consensual sex to what is obviously her being raped by a ghost.
Yeah.
And I actually thought they handled that scene pretty well. Like, I think they captured a lot of the unpleasantness while avoiding
graphic anything. Yeah, it's all implied. Basically, when I watch this movie, it makes me want to read the book again. So that's not high praise for the movie necessarily. And I do, I can't ignore the snicker factor that this movie does have at times. Like, if you're laughing more than you're scared, I can't really fully endorse the movie. But I still do like Matheson, and I like the imagination of the story.
Yeah, I think I might have liked it more than you. I thought there was a certain... Like, it was dated, but there was also a certain timeless quality to it, which there isn't always, and particularly in ghost movies. I guess we'll get to it. I didn't think Poltergeist was timeless in the same way.
Right.
So there are special effects stuff that is jarring, but that's going to be the case with almost every movie that we see and almost every ghost movie that we see. But I thought it aged relatively well. Mm-hmm. Some of the cuts I found jarring. There would be a scene and it was like, okay, this is done and we're not going to, like, there's no leading us out of the scene. It just ends very abruptly, and then there's a new whatever, Tuesday, 7 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
and a new one has started.
I think it would be a fun drinking game if every time somebody either said something dramatically at the end of a scene, or a scene started with a caption of the date and time, you have to have a drink.
Oh, you would be blitzed. Like, because every scene starts like that,
Yeah.
right? They just, the scene, they decide, okay, that's played out, we're not gonna take you out of it, it's just the important things have been said, so cut.
Yeah. At first I thought Shining, but this is actually a few years before The Shining even, so I don't know what that choice was about necessarily. The fact that it was set over the holidays didn't seem that significant, you know.
I think they were just trying new stuff, because I noticed some camera work that I didn't necessarily agree with, but I thought I could sort of appreciate they were taking a chance. Like, when we see there's some sort of ghosty haunting scene and the shot goes upside down and sort of spins a little bit, and there's something Hitchcockian about it in a way that a lot of those
close-up shots for conversations for some reason.
And a lot of those Hitchcock angles don't really work that well, 40 years later, but you can appreciate what they were doing at the time.
I think that it's well said. It feels like they're trying something there. They didn't necessarily have a plan, but they were trying stuff.
Well, the only other thing, the thing that I found the most amusing about the movie was right at the beginning. There was this superimposed warning that although this film is fictitious, it could be true.
It could be true, Matthew.
What does that even mean? And why was it a warning?
I don't know. I don't know. It's just one of many questions, I guess.
Yeah.
Why do bad things happen to good people? We're just a regular family like anybody else. We didn't ask for this, and we didn't deserve it. It's perfect. It's spacious and affordable. I'm just wondering, where's the catch?
Well, it does have a bit of a history.
First one upstairs, gets first choice to rooms.
Matt, did you find a bedroom? Down here?
It's nice and it's cool. Everything's back there.
Mm-hmm. Matt?
Who put these things under the floorboards?
I've seen this kid almost every day since we've been here.
You're scaring me.
We'll join the club.
So like any horror movie that claims to be based on true events, you have to put huge quotation marks around based on true events. And I think like this one is particularly hilarious because it's based on a like made-for-TV documentary which was based on true events. So it's like this chain letter ghost story. But if you have the DVD or the Blu-ray, you can hear the woman herself, who's the subject of the movie, talk straight-faced about all of these horrifying ghostly events that happened to her and her son, who was at the time fighting for his life with cancer, and her whole family.
That framing device was the stupidest thing in retrospect. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
Her talking about, what is it, why do bad things happen to good people?
We got no answers for you.
Yeah, and also everybody lives, so that's good.
Everybody got spooked real good and then they moved away.
And her son's cancer.
Review done. 56 seconds. Yeah. So Virginia Madsen stars as the matriarch of this family who move into a house in order to be closer to the hospital where her son's being treated, that is perfect for them, and that it's got good size, it's closer to where they need to be, but it's weird in that it used to be a mortuary and a funeral home.
Yeah.
So it's got that ugly history. And lo and behold, very shortly after they move in, creepy stuff happens. This also seems maybe aggravated because they're a very Christian family, and in ghost worlds, the evil ghosts really hate you if you love the Jesus.
Yeah. But thankfully the Jesus is powerful and good at fighting ghosts.
I think it's a fairly well-made movie, and it's notable in that our Canadian actor Elias Koteas and Virginia Madsen are reunited from the previous horror movie they worked together on was The Prophecy, starring Christopher Walken.
Right. I totally forgot about that.
So it was, they probably was like, hey, nice to see you again. You know, I don't believe the story being told here at all, but I'm just going to approach this movie as a straight up, if, you know, you're trying to scare me, tell me a ghost story. I will go with you. And on a basic things jumping out of the dark and make me go boo, technical filmmaking level, I think it's fine.
See, I'm going to have to disagree with you a little bit.
Okay.
There are some things that I thought they did quite well. I thought when there's a scene with a psychic channeling spirits, and there's ectoplasm, very much like an updated version of what happened in The Legend of Hell House. I thought the ectoplasm looked great in this. First time that I've maybe thought it looked really good in a movie. And they use CGI well, which almost never happens. I almost always think CGI is the kiss of death for ghost movies, but I thought they were sparing enough with it that it kind of looked neat, and somewhere in between, like, sticky and gross, but also ethereal and intangible. I thought they did well there. As far as things jumping out and saying boo, they were so close, but the music was so bombastic and awful, and it's like, it reminds me of vaudevillian comedians who didn't have faith in their audience to recognize when there was a joke, so they went
yeah, drum roll, there we go.
And that was like every time they were, something's creepy, something's creepy, something's creepy, and then you see something and there's also this swell of just like the most stock scary movie. I couldn't even scary movie music, I couldn't imitate it, but it's like that stuff that you've heard a billion times, and if there was a made-for-TV ghost movie, that is the exact type of music that you would expect to hear, and it's not interesting and it's too loud.
Yeah, there is something about it that's a little bit big in scale. It's not quite like operatic or huge like Bram Stoker's Dracula or anything like that, but like they're treating this like heavy-handed history almost, right? They're trying to make you, this is a true story, all this actually happened. There's also the wince moments, like there's a scene where they show this eyelids being cut off corpses.
Yeah, I've got that actually in my comments of things that I thought were well done.
Woof. I don't often, want to look away. Like, I'm pretty hardened. I've watched a lot of fucking horror movies. That shit was pretty ugly. It doesn't feel like a PG movie to me. I mean, yeah, it was rated 14A according to the DVD set. It made a shit ton of money when it came out theatrically, and it has spawned a sequel, and it's hilariously entitled A Haunting in Connecticut 2, The Ghosts of Georgia.
That seems like a tourist, like a Georgia tour or something put out by Travel Georgia.
What about A Haunting in Georgia? How would that? We would get it, you guys. We would get it. Anyway, please, what do you think of The Haunting in Connecticut?
This was the one that I referred to as most obviously bottom of the list.
Okay.
There were some effective scenes. Again, the eyelid cutting off scene was done well. The ectoplasm was done well. There was a scene where, I can't remember if somebody punches a wall or puts his hand in a wall, and the house it's all fleshy and it's covered in maggots, and that was quite an interesting scene. But there was this almost visceral pointlessness to the movie. There's almost no story, and everything seems to be geared to solving this mystery that isn't a mystery. There's some psychic kid that lived in the house at some point and died, and there was some guy that was doing dark experiments for some reason, and that caused all the ghosts. But
is the little kid ghost good or bad? Because when we see him, he's all burnt and scary looking, but he's actually trying to be helpful. Right?
Yeah, and it seems like somebody in first year screenwriting school thought that was a twist, because things shift a little bit.
Well, we're certainly going to see it done better in another movie we're talking about anyway.
Yeah, but I didn't like the other movie being The Ring. And something like The Sixth Sense, or these movies that are famous for their good twists,
Right.
those twists are good because they totally change the paradigm of what you've been watching, and they totally flip everything that you thought, and you can go back and think, the way that I watched it, it made sense perfectly, but actually this way it also makes sense perfectly.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's something that I think our brains really like, which is why these movies that can do it well tend to be
Stay with us.
Yeah, but this was just nothing. So we knew why these ghosts were there, and it wasn't this bad guy, it was another bad guy, so there's that. And also, I had written, as I mentioned with Hell House, that the characters do a lot of expositioning by themselves.
Yeah.
Elias Koteas was very noticeable in his role as this movie's narrator.
Indeed.
The movie the screenwriters just couldn't figure out, because this is obviously a first draft, how they're going to get this exposition out there. So just every now and then, Elias Koteas will say stuff that just puke out all of this, like, this is what's been going on, and okay.
It's like I said with Roddy McDowall giving all that exposition at the end of Hell House. We don't even understand how he knows all this other than he's a psychic, but all of a sudden it just comes to him. We don't have any help in that payoff. I don't want to overstate my joy for The Haunting in Connecticut 2. I say it's completely okay. It certainly didn't blow me out of the water. I don't necessarily understand why it was such a huge thing at the box office, other than that very common horror thing. It's based on true events, but I don't know. And again, we talked about the bookend thing where she's being interviewed, possibly for the Discovery Channel documentary that this is inspired by. The acting here is better than the Discovery Channel documentary, we can give it that. Although I wanted to mention Martin Donovan, who I've talked about before. He plays the husband who's always away and comes back and is grumpy.
Yeah, he was almost a really interesting character until they decided not to do anything interesting with him.
And there's also something about that actor. There's weird flatness to him. I don't know, he has that one scene where he comes and he busts all the light bulbs because he's pissed off that they have every light in the house on. And it's that sort of classic horror movie thing that I usually like, when somebody is, by not believing the unbelievable stakes of the horror movie, ends up making things way worse for the protagonists.
Right.
Now it's even scarier because it's all dark and spooky in the house. But yeah, he's got this monotone delivery that he always I'm always seeing Martin Donovan whenever I see that guy,
But, I actually really liked the scene where he was busting all those light bulbs.
Because you were right there with him?
Been a recovering alcoholic who had fallen off the wagon.
Yeah.
Because of all this financial stress, and his son's got cancer. And I thought one of two things might happen. One of a few things, but either he might become something like possessed, or might become a dangerous figure himself. As it turns out, he just breaks light bulbs and then yells and then apologizes. Or I thought maybe something will happen and there will be some sort of redemption or some sort of character arc, but it's just, he seems, as you said, kind of flatly angry, and then there's this scene where he explodes that I actually bought it. I thought, he seemed like a potentially dangerous guy, and when the family is all huddled together, locked in a room, it feels like they've done this before, and he really can become dangerous, but then nothing happens with that.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
And then she's like, no, do it again and you're out. And he's like, okay, I won't. And then he doesn't, so that's good. But it's kind of like, that's the whole thing about the movie. Why do bad things happen to good people? Nothing all that bad happens.
Well, their son is going through a horrible experience. Kyle Gallner plays
he's
the
going
kid
through a
who's
whole
going through
horrible experience, but if they hadn't moved into the haunted house and met the psychic ghost, his cancer wouldn't have been psychic cured. Yeah. So all of this is by way of saving his life.
Yeah. I think it might have been interesting if they played up the fact he's being pumped full of chemicals regularly. He's on the edge of dying himself. Is there not a haunting? Is this not all in his head? Yeah. But when we have ghostly things happening to everybody in the family, it's very conclusively not that, right? So they can't play that. That might have been something to help it. But
yeah, and they could have actually done something. Could have gone as far as to balance it in the Pan's Labyrinth type of way, where it's, there may, like, it's perfectly readable with this supernatural stuff happening, and it's perfectly readable without it happening.
Yeah.
That might have been one tack to take, but
one thing that I will say that I like, that I've seen in other ghost movies, we talked about Dark Water sort of being as another example of this when we did that movie, that they're kind of prisoners of poverty in this house. There's a typical thing where they can just, why don't you just leave the house? But there's like 8 of them living there, right? And they're trying to sell their other house so they can properly afford this house, and they really don't have an option to leave other than sleeping outside with children, I find that an interesting angle to play. A similar movie in The Entity was like, just move away. Well, they can't. They're dead broke. This is where they live.
yeah, and they did a pretty good job establishing the poverty. The dad had to sell his car, and there was sort of a confrontational scene about that where you could tell that the money situation was getting to him.
Yeah. I don't know. All the pieces were there. It just didn't 100% connect, but I didn't hate it. I thought it was, like I said, fine.
No, I say it's the most obviously the worst one to me. I would give it maybe a C+. It's not a bad movie, but there's nothing really good about it. There's no point in watching it, I would say.
And the climax, the sort of forced explosive house fire climax where all of a sudden there's bodies falling out of the walls. I mean, I think it's a little bit off the rails by that point.
Yeah.
Like,
I wondered if that wasn't an homage to Poltergeist with the bodies falling out of the swimming pool dugout.
Yeah. Maybe. I don't know. But at least they justify... Well, it was a mortuary. He was keeping the bodies. But the fact that nobody noticed... No renovations had ever happened in the house where they happened to notice, hey, you got a bit of a corpse wall happening here.
Yeah.
I don't know. But if you're going to be thinking that deeply about these ghost movies, I think that you're working against it.
Yeah. And, if Elias Koteas didn't think it was worth spouting off about why it was there, it's probably not important. The filmmakers think.
If they're not happy with this film, they'll always have the prophecy.
The house looks just like the one next to it. And the one next to that. And the one next to that. A young couple live in it.
Give Ken a kiss.
You are so obnoxious.
With their 3 children.
Of course, you have to chew each bite 10 times.
And something more.
They're here.
Sweetie, remember last night? Do you remember when you woke up and you said you were here?
Uh-huh.
Well, who did you mean? Who's here?
TV people.
Something's funny going on here next door. Something,
We were wondering if maybe you had experienced any disturbances lately.
What kind of disturbances?
So from one family in peril to another, but this family is, not going to be under the guise of based on a true story. In fact, this is about as big and fantastical a ghost story as you could ever come up with it. I get the feeling like Steven Spielberg, read the Amityville Horror and sort of said, me too, right?
Yeah. Although this had more of and I had obviously totally forgotten because I saw this like 20 years ago was the last time I saw it, something like that.
Wow.
Actually, I saw it with you. But I had forgotten how light the tone was and how...
Disney.
Yeah, almost weirdly comical. At the beginning, there's a scene where a guy's riding his... Like, an older guy is riding a BMX bike that's too small for him, and he's carrying a case of beer, and then kids are tormenting him with... their remote control cars, and then he falls and a bunch of the beer breaks, and it's played for laughs.
Ha 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 ha! What an idyllic suburban neighborhood.
Yeah. And I just didn't understand the choice really. Like, I mean, it wasn't funny, but it wasn't terrible.
Right.
But why is that needed for this movie?
Well, and I think that the fact that Spielberg actually has a writing credit on this, and of course, not to jump into the conspiratorial pool right away, it's been said that Spielberg largely directed this movie. Cast members have said in the past that there were entire sections of shooting where Tobe Hooper was not on set.
Well, Tobe Hooper was a bit of a raging alcoholic, wasn't he?
I think he can be a bit of a difficult fellow. And again, I think another thing that adds credence to this sort of rumor conspiracy thing is look at every Spielberg movie and look at every Tobe Hooper movie and tell me which category Poltergeist falls in. Because this family, beautiful neighborhood, the sort of whimsical nature, the heartstrings, the big John Williams score, this all screams Spielberg to me.
Yeah.
And in a way, that makes the movie safe. Because when we're in Spielberg, we can be entertained by Spielberg, but the stakes never feel that high. I always feel like everything's going to be okay, right? But this movie is Poltergeist. This movie's going to go dark. So does it still scare you, I guess I'm going to ask all these years later?
No, there's nothing scary about it. It's not as unscary as Poltergeist 2 turned out to be, which we discussed the last time I was on this show. The scene that really traumatized me was that one ghost hunter looking in the mirror and touching his face, and his face was falling off, and it really looked a lot like a rubber face model or something.
Yeah.
So that wasn't scary. Also, in the when the wife had fallen into the pool in the dugout and the bodies were falling on her, that was really upsetting to me as a child. That maybe is the closest that the movie comes to having something resembling scary, but that's not really scary. You could just imagine how unpleasant it would be.
I remember when I rewatched that movie this time around, thinking that secondary sort of climax after the rescue of Carol Ann, that one sort of sequence later, might have been a sequence too far. Like they could have probably just called it a good night after they got Carol Ann out and then she was out of there, but they decided that no, they were going to stay another night after that.
Yeah. the reason for staying another night was really questionable. Like why they didn't, like, why would they go back under any circumstances?
But I'm going to back up, and because I'm not going to be overly negative about this movie. In fact, I'll be more positive than negative. Like, I love the moments of discovery. I like the early sort of small beats when things start going wrong. And Jo Beth Williams' character, instead of being like horrified, is kind of really into it. When she can make the chairs slide across the room, it's like amazing. And
and then she makes her daughter slide across the room. That was charming. There was actually a lot of charming moments with this family that I thought aged better than the ghost stuff. So, like that throwaway scene kind of where Coach and his wife are smoking pot and he's reading the Reagan
Jerry
biography.
Award-winning actor.
Oh, right, he's a Jerry Award winner, yeah. But he was reading Ronald Reagan's biography.
Yeah.
That was just awesome.
Beautiful. It was like they were trying to make a wink.
Or the subtle kind of, I don't know, it was not even a backstory or peripheral story, but just the subtle clues about the daughter's promiscuous habits where they say that they're going to be staying in a motel off of the interstate, and she's like, yeah, I know that place. Or when right after the big climax, she runs out of her friend's car and she's got this big hickey on her neck.
Yeah. I remember the difference between my experience with a kid, other than being much more frightened of the movie, and I will give you that. When I was a kid, I really locked into the little kid's experience, particularly that snaggletooth little boy. It sounds mean, but it's true. He's really got a mouthful of teeth. But like, I was that kid. His battle with the clown and that whole "I hate you" fight, and then being grabbed by the tree and almost swallowed alive, like that was just amazing to me when I was a kid. Watching it now, I'm all about the parents. There's a scene that drifted by all my other viewings until my most recent, where Jo Beth Williams and Craig T. Nelson, Jerry Award-winning actor Craig T. Nelson, have put the kids to bed. They go into the room and shut the door, and she rolls them a couple of joints, like a joint each, and they both start smoking weed and talking about the day until Carol Ann walks in to complain about noises in her bedroom. But I completely missed that whole angle to the movie, and what Poltergeist really solves for me is like, why don't you leave? These people are affluent. They could leave whenever they want.
Right.
Carol Ann disappears. Their little girl disappears, but they can still hear her, sometimes even smell her. She's in the house. So of course they're not going to leave. And in a way, that's sort of that solution in the screenplay as to keeping them there is something that a lot of haunted house movies just don't have. They're either not scared, like you say, they're investigators who just are more curious than scared, so if they're not scared, we're not. Or, there are people who are there and don't know it's haunted, so there's no stakes for them.
Right.
So I like that. I think that still works. The special effects are nostalgically 80s. What can we say?
Stop motion of all those Star Wars toys that made me so jealous as a young man watching when they're moving around in this...
Thousands of dollars worth of toys flying by the screen, I'm sure.
Yeah, and it all looks kind of silly. Like, you could easily be playing Calliope music and it could be an ad for Toys R Us.
Yeah, I guess I have to agree with you that the movie is not that frightening anymore. But I am still completely charmed by it. It carries me along. I didn't feel bored watching the movie at any point. I was involved with it, right? And for a movie, what is this, 30-some years old now?
Yeah, it would be early 80s. I think I saw it on my 7th birthday.
So yeah.
Thereabouts.
So I think considering that, it has aged well. And for a movie that's nestled nicely in the middle of the 80s, it's not embarrassingly, cringeworthy, big hair distracting 80s,
yeah.
Right? You sort of can still relate to these people,
Yeah.
They're nice American Republicans who mean well.
No, and this is one of the things that I said was sort of redeeming about Poltergeist 2, is that the family has a lot of chemistry together. These actors obviously get on well.
Yeah.
Particularly Coach and his wife. Couple of curious moments just to bring up. One is early on when the 16-year-old daughter is leaving for school and there's 3, I don't know what they are, landscapers or something, that are working for the family, and they all start catcalling her in the most obvious, disgusting, these
not funny, cute wink wink way.
Yeah, and she does this elaborate thing of giving them the finger in the 80s for guests or listeners too young to remember. It was fashionable to do this big Rube Goldberg series of gestures that ended up climaxed in the finger. So she does that, and that was the big payoff. But her mom is watching this outside the window, and she's just smiling oh, these employees of mine.
Yeah, that's hilarious. She should be out cock punching all of them right
they
now.
are seriously sexually harassing her daughter. There's 3 guys. She's not even walking past a construction site. They're within grabbing distance of her.
Yeah.
And I guess it was a different time. That was okay.
Well, like I said, there's this weird 80s thing. Nowadays, mom and pop would never be smoking a joint in their bedroom, And some of the stuff that the kids say, you wouldn't hear. Just the different climate of the 80s. But I kind of find that weirdly charming about the movie, too.
Yeah, I mean, the scene that I just described was both charming and, I don't know, I thought perhaps a little bit grosser than I had... just a little bit on the gross side of charming, but it's also a time capsule. That would have been considered a funny scene that just doesn't age well.
I will say, even though we both said it doesn't go all that scary, it does a good job of turning the dial from sort of Disney charm to now more spooky territory. By the time they got the scientists there doing the investigation, the atmosphere it's presenting is at least closer to what you imagine a straight-up horror movie would be.
Yeah, that's true.
And the sense of wonder as well that they're allowed, as well as fear, I appreciate. And that really feels Spielberg to me, too. There's one side of them that are horrified, but, seeing the footage of the lights coming down the stairs has also got this weird sort of wondrous quality to it.
Right.
I kind of appreciate that too. I guess if no one's ever seen a ghost, I think it would be a pretty amazing and unprecedented thing to experience. And a lot of times we don't feel that weight in movies,
Yeah.
So it was addressed here, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, they did a pretty good job there. I was also a little bit curious. So these are all new housing developments that it turns out that this house is haunted because they were one of the first houses built in the neighborhood, and it was built on a graveyard, and they
used to be a graveyard. They relocated the graveyard.
Well, so they said that, but as it turns out, at the end, they just relocated the headstones. And there's a scene earlier on, before we learn about the graves under Craig T. Nelson's house, somewhere quite far away, there's another graveyard that needs to get relocated.
Yeah.
And then the big the big climax at the end, or the big reveal, is you never moved the bodies. But this is all new development. Like, I don't understand why there were two massive graveyards this
I think
far
it was
away.
establishing the pattern.
Yeah, but where did those bodies come from? It's not like there was, like, you know, towns will have graveyards because people live in towns and get buried by the church. But it couldn't just be a town, because why would a small town that, I guess, got bulldozed to nothing have two big graveyards?
Right.
Like, it seemed like an awful coincidence that
I guess I didn't think about it that way. I figured the business they figured people, when they situate graveyards, do it in places that are meant to be scenic and beautiful. So we'll buy up the line of the graveyards, move the graveyards, and put up our condominiums there or whatever. Right? That was their, like, modus operandi.
And I would have bought it for one, but two, it just seems like there's an awful lot of graveyards.
Fair enough. I mean, have we been hard on Poltergeist? I feel like we've been hard on Poltergeist.
I don't know. I would put it, like, I gave it a B-. I think it's still watchable. It's more enjoyable, I think, as we've discussed, as a movie of its time that couldn't be made today but was made well for the 80s, and there's a certain nostalgic feel, and some things were done technically well. It doesn't age that well as a scary movie. Well, it doesn't age at all as a scary movie, but as an interesting movie, it's all right.
Not all ghost movies have to be the hard R, you know, go for your throat movies either. I think you can do a good spooky PG ghost movie. I'm not against that necessarily.
In fact, I think it's rare to have a hard R ghost movie. I think almost all of the movies that I've reviewed for this have been PG. Certainly most of today's movies.
The Devil's Backbone is the only one of the ones we're reviewing here that are R-rated.
Yeah, and that's not even a hard R. That's a soft R.
Do you know the story of Madeline O'Malley? She was the woman that died here in the hotel. She hung herself after her fiancé stood her up on their wedding day. And ever since then, people have reported seeing the ghost of Madeline O'Malley roaming the hallways waiting for her lover. Some say she's even looking to take up a new one. This is our last weekend open, so we've got to find some proof that Madeline O'Malley really exists before this place closes down.
I have my microphone so we can make do with EVP investigations.
Yes, I'd like a room for the night.
Since the hotel is practically empty, we might have a good chance of making some real contact.
What was that?
Did you hear that?
So here comes the time in the episode where I have to once again, presumably, defend Ty West. He does have a good reputation. If you look him up on the internet, people seem to like his work, but I always feel like whenever I end up reviewing one of his movies, I'm the guy who likes it, and I'm like in his corner. One thing that I will say is true, that you tend to prepare yourself with if you're watching Ty West, is that the man will take his time. He really is all about the atmosphere and working your nerves and getting you to an earned payoff. I think more often than not it works. I have given him negative reviews in the past, but for me, I think that the Innkeepers works way more than it doesn't. Is it for everybody? No. But I think if you like atmospheric, spooky movies, this is one of them.
Well, Larry, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you here, because you won't have to defend this movie from me. I thought The Innkeepers was great.
Awesome.
It was definitely one of my favorites on the list. It will rank very high. But, I mean, I had mentioned to you in an email or a message a couple of days ago that I had mixed feelings
You're
about
of
it.
two minds or something, yeah.
And there's part of me that, like, it's weird that I like it. I don't exactly know why I like it. I mean, there are some things that I have an idea about. The characters were both really well drawn and well acted, well cast. But kind of like how Haunting in Connecticut, there was no point, there was no reason for the movie really, like the story really to be told. That's kind of the case in Innkeepers. There's no important mystery that needs to get solved or does get solved. There's no paradigm shift. I don't even know if there's what you would call a twist. It's really slow. It's broken up into chapters, which I thought was a nice touch, but I'm not even exactly sure why it was broken into chapters or what the deal was. And I don't know, the movie is greater than the sum of its parts, because I don't know why I liked it as much as I did, but I liked it quite a lot.
Well, I think, this is a very different movie than Poltergeist, which we just came to. If the family from Poltergeist ran from their, spirited, ghosted away home and went to this hotel, it would have been a very different movie altogether. But I think this movie is about its characters, and it's sort of about that confrontation with the supernatural. What we have here are two people who really, I feel, want to believe in the supernatural.
Yeah.
The character that was it Pat Healy plays?
Yeah, his name's Luke.
Luke, he has claimed to have seen a ghost in the past, and we find out subsequently that this is bullshit.
Yeah.
Whether he was doing it just to impress the very cute Sarah Paxton, the much younger of the two ghost hunters, or whether or not he was just trying to get credit for his website. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he works as an innkeeper in an old hotel. Presumably, he's been there for a while. The actor was in his early 40s. I assume the character was in his early 40s. Just one of those guys that, I guess, got the job when he was 17 or something and hasn't
never
left it. And, the hotel that they're innkeepers at has a reputation for being haunted, and I think he probably just liked the story and like telling himself the story and like telling other people the story, and he's putting together this website with sounds, mysterious sounds or whatever that he's heard there. And probably when Sarah Paxton, her character's name is Claire, when she got into it, it became something they could do together, because he's obviously got this huge crush on her that he just about tells her at one point.
Yeah. But that moment where two people, in this case, I don't think he's necessarily skeptical, but he's never seen ghosts and is not expecting to see it. And it would be that great thing that would happen if one of the dozens of ghost, documentaries that they have on TV where they go to places and freak each other out and there's jittery, shaky camera. I want to see something where they actually authentically fucking see something and lose their shit.
And I thought the actor did such a good job of losing his shit when he thought there was a ghost. Like, he didn't... In some ways it wasn't cinematic, right? He didn't scream, he just started crying and
he fell apart.
humiliated and had to run away.
Yeah. He fell apart, and that wonder moment that the scientific eye or the investigative curious eye who wants to see this, and yet when he sees it can't handle it, right? Sarah Paxton is much more of a true blue believer, and she's receptive to it almost, and that receptiveness proves in a lot of ways to be part of her undoing, really.
Well, yeah, that must be why. There's a psychic character played by
Kelly McGillis, former sex symbol Kelly McGillis from Top Gun.
Yeah, and she says that Claire is in particular danger, and it's never explained why she's in particular danger, but it must be that she's more attuned to the supernatural.
Yeah. And she's really actively seeking this ghost out in the way that Luke isn't.
Yeah.
Luke is just sort of fucking around on the computer and clock watch until he can go, do whatever he does when he's not at the hotel.
Watch a lot of internet porn.
Watch some pornography.
That scene where she was his browser history. This movie is just so full of nice touches.
Yeah.
That was one. She was looking at his browser history for something, and no attention is brought to the fact that there are all these XXX sites, but it just says so much about Luke. There's another scene where she's taking out garbage, and there's this big heavy garbage bag, and she keeps trying to throw it into the dumpster, and the dumpster lid keeps closing, and there's no real reason for this scene. It leads to her locking a door that will come back later.
To haunt her later, yeah.
But they didn't need to have that long scene, right? It's just...
But I like that scene.
No, me too. It was building up the character. It was tonally ambiguous, which works really well for ghost movies.
The stuff that I question maybe a little bit more, but again, I wouldn't necessarily lose it. I would just question it. There's a scene where she goes to get them coffee, and Lena Dunham, this woman, she created this HBO show, Girls. She's like a big name in TV in Hollywood right now anyway. She's got this weird one scene role of this bored employee at a coffee house who won't let her leave, who just wants to bore the shit out of Sarah Paxton with her life story. Why is that scene there?
Yeah.
Or the guest that they're constantly neglecting, who's clearly hiding from her husband and who's just always pissed off,
Yeah, and they're rude too. And also, Luke always forgets to bring towels to people, and I thought that might come up somehow climactically, but it really doesn't.
Nope, just
but it
another
does
thing.
a good job of establishing a non-forced kind of close fun relationship between the two characters, where like she is as close as you could get to the manic pixie dream girl without being that.
Yeah.
Like she's not shitty about it or not
She's the
annoying.
genuine article in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Her interest in the supernatural is real. She's just absolutely earnestly open to it.
Yeah, and she's not super gorgeous, but she's cute in that quirky way, but it works because her quirks aren't telegraphed so much.
I kind of liked her goofy, nerdy vibe that she had. It kind of, like, she sort of seemed sweet, so you kind of felt for her when things got all dark and shit.
Yeah. Things that didn't work quite so well for me, like in Haunting in Connecticut, there are a couple of ghost scenes. There's a scene where there's a ghost in bed with her, and it turns out to be a dream, presumably, or was it? But it gets really bombastic, music-y in a way that kind of wrecks the scare for me. It would be much creepier just to have, I mean, so much of this movie is understated and there's so much going on in the background. Why not understate that ghost and just make it a little bit more horrific, because it's not swell of brass instruments when we see it.
Right.
And I think I would say that's almost always the case in the ghost genre, that less is more.
Yeah. About the sort of craftsmanship of the movie, like, I have the DVD and there's a warning when you watch it, or like say, please watch this in a dark room and turn the sound way up. Like, they paid a lot of particular attention to sound design, and there's sequences with Sarah Paxton wandering through the hotel waving the microphone about that I do think does reward you. If you're in a nice dark room and you can play something loud, I think that the movie, that does help work your nerves.
Yeah, and that might actually be one of the reasons why I liked the movie so much, because I just watched it the other night and I'm staying in the guest suite in my dad's house in the basement, and I got new headphones, so I was watching it in a dark room in headphones.
Nice.
And it was very, like, it just captured me the whole time.
Yeah, it works very well, and it's very meticulously made. Like you say, there's stuff you don't know why it's there, but definitely for a reason it is there. One thing I do want to ask you about, because it's one thing that I don't know if I'm mixed about, but I've always sort of questioned the caption that starts "One last guest." That creepy old dude who shows up and insists on going to that room upstairs, and subsequently ends up taking his life. You get the feeling that was the best place, the happiest place he'd ever been in his life, and he chose that's where he wanted to end it. Did we need that extra story arc? Do you think the other story was enough to sustain it?
Well, I thought there was something going on between him and the existing ghost, who was presumably a woman. We get various histories of her that are unreliable, and when we find out that Luke was making up some of it, those histories get even more unreliable. But I had kind of imagined that was the room where something bad happened to her, and he had some relationship with her, but who knows what it was. Like, maybe he murdered her, or maybe he raped her, maybe they were in love, or maybe something. But this 80-year-old guy that goes up to a room to slit his wrists in a bathtub, which is a really odd way, I think, for an 80-year-old guy to kill himself.
Yeah.
Surely there's some pharmaceuticals that he could take.
Yeah.
But then, spoilers, I kind of don't want to spoil this because I think people should see it.
Okay.
He's instrumental in
the climactic moments.
Yeah, and hostile. And I don't know if because he's a ghost he becomes hostile, because in life both of the innkeepers were quite nice to him, and he seemed appreciative of it. So, like, maybe the building is evil and it just turns everybody into stuff, or maybe there was some relationship between him and the regular ghost, because he wanted to go to the inn before it closed. This was important to him.
He wanted to sort of die with the hotel, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, what was your take?
Well, I can't help it, because I guess that's the way I'm wired. I go to The Shining, like it's like a hotel that sort of collects spirits. If you die there, you're kind of stuck there. And that he somehow knew that, and that was sort of his play for immortality.
Oh, that's an interesting theory.
But, I mean, they don't establish that as a thing of the hotel. As far as we know, there's only that one ghost that they're looking for, right? But again, maybe there's more as implied. Or are they collecting more? You know? Kelly McGillis, who's playing this ex-celebrity who's now a psychic, I can't help but think that they're actually referencing Dee Wallace. She still does horror movies and sci-fi. That the bulk of her career has been, but she's also a spiritualist and fancies herself like into crystals and all of that stuff. And I kind of felt like they couldn't get Dee Wallace, so they got Kelly McGillis here.
I don't think they couldn't get Dee Wallace as a phrase that carries much weight. I don't think she's that much.
She was booked, okay? What do you want?
She may have been doing a conference that weekend or something. I just thought, I think that makes sense. I had assumed it was just another one of those nice odd touches of the movie. There was no reason that the psychic had to have been in a popular family sitcom 20 years earlier, 15 years earlier.
Right.
But this movie really likes these details that are not necessarily significant, or they're not...
I like that the movie doesn't go out of its way to make us necessarily like all of our characters, you know? Like, the Kelly McGillis character is kind of a cow, you know?
Yeah.
And, like, the Pat Healy character has definitely got his issues, you know? We kind of like the Sarah Paxton character, but she is impossibly naive somehow, it seems, you know? Like, I don't know. Everybody has their flaws and just wears them proudly, I guess. I don't know. The movie works for me. It's a slow burn, and it's not for everyone. There is not a fright around every corner, but the frights that they deliver, they earn, and for me, they work.
Yeah, I would say, except for the bombastic brass music in one or two scenes, the frights work. But even better than the frights, there's just something so unstable about what kind of movie you're watching, which, unlike, say, with Poltergeist, where tonally it would go back and forth in ways that could be a little bit jarring. There's nothing jarring in the tonal uncertainty of the movie. It just worked well with keeping you on your toes, and like sort of anything could happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was really good.
I wasn't always scared, but I was never bored.
Yeah.
Have you heard about this videotape that kills you when you watch it? You start to play it, and it's like somebody's nightmare. And as soon as it's over, your phone rings. And what they say is, you will die in 7 days.
Katie told you she was gonna die.
She told me. She said she didn't have enough time.
Would you say that I'm gullible?
Okay, Gore Verbinski, who had previous to this movie made an absolutely wonderful children's film called Mouse Hunt. I actually legitimately think that movie is hilarious.
I know, because every time I visited you, say between 2001 and when you started doing this podcast, you always tried to get me to watch Mouse Hunt.
And that day will never come.
That day will never come.
Christopher Walken plays a mouse hunter. Anyway, but we're not here to talk about Mouse Hunt, as fun as that would be. Another day. Maybe next episode with Matt. I'll sneak it in somehow.
It would be another when animals attack kind of thing.
The Ring impressed me on many feats, but especially because it was so different than what he'd done previously, and also very visually arresting. This is a remake of a creepy, eerie Japanese film, I want to say. It's Japanese?
Yeah, it's Japanese.
Ringu. And Naomi Watts, who was, hot off of her Mulholland Drive, got one of her first big starring roles, and a really juicy one at that.
Yeah.
She plays a reporter whose niece dies under very mysterious circumstances, and who is implored by her sister to investigate the circumstances of the death. This leads her to a bizarre videotape, which has this curse of it that anyone who watches it will die in 7 days. And not only does her clock start for the 7 days, but inadvertently her son's as well.
Yeah, well, her ex-husband, she also... That's not as inadvertent. That was actually something that I didn't really notice. It didn't strike me the first time I saw it, but it struck me this time. When she had watched the movie for the first time, by that point she had seen enough to...
She was pretty convinced something was up.
Yeah, so she shows it to her ex-husband, whom she's still sort of friends with. It kind of felt like murder.
It's horror movie convenient that he happened to be a video editor. Like, he could give her valuable information, and it was,
Right.
important to her to stay alive.
Which
and
is
she has a
actually-
moment of doubt. Like, she says, I'm not sure if I should give it to you or not. But, of course, when you say that to someone, it's almost like enticing them. It's daring them not to watch it, right?
Yeah. It was actually a weird choice for the remake to make him a video editor, because he wasn't in the original.
No.
But she was a journalist, as she is in this, so she knew all of the important things to know about film. So, as actually with a lot of the decisions they made for the adaptation, I couldn't always tell why they were doing it. Like, the only thing I can figure for the American version of The Ring is some executive at DreamWorks just didn't think the audience would buy the fact that a woman might know about videotapes. There's no reason why they had to give that role to him.
I think there's a clarity to the A, B, and C of the story in this remake that isn't necessarily as there in Ringu. But most of the additions I actually really like. I'm overall very positive on The Ring.
It's harder for me to say, I think, because I've seen both of them enough times, but going back to this one, I was actually a little bit less impressed by it than I had been before. Maybe it's that it's really starting to be dated and not exactly in a charming way. There's some charming way that it's dated in that it involves a VHS tape and landlines. This movie couldn't exist anymore. But there's irritating things too, like the color palette. This is after the technology has been developed to give the color palette in post-production. Right. So where it actually has a similar palette to the original Japanese one, but that was done with gels and lighting, and this was all done in post, and there's a feeling about this movie that a lot of it was done in post.
Deliberately heavily textured quality.
Yeah. And when we see the ghost at the end of this, just pales in comparison to the original one, because it feels so CGI in this.
Yeah, see, I've always kind of preferred the remake, but I've always wondered if it wasn't because I saw the remake before I saw the original.
Yeah, it could be because I saw the original before I saw the remake.
So, like, the twists weren't as new to me. So, the tape itself, the actual images on the tape, I mean, I think it would be an interesting sort of task to face as a director. I don't know how specifically it would have been described in the script, other than a series of, horrifying images.
Well, no, because I think they changed the tape for the remake, but the tape was fine both ways. Everything in the tape was a clue, right? Because they go over the tape almost piece by piece. I don't know if every piece is significant, but a lot of it becomes significant.
Right.
So I think, they just jumbled it together, but there were these things that they needed to have.
Right. Well, there's like the bugs and the writhing pile of bodies and the weird sort of...
And the mirror and the tree and the woman in the mirror.
The woman combing was sort of the thing that they kept coming back to.
Yeah.
But anyway, I found it striking. I thought, like... I believe this guy had a background in making music videos that it could be unnerving, and I think the tape itself worked, and I like sort of the very threatening, imposing image of just that wellhead by itself, even before you understand what the context of it is.
Yeah.
It's creepy. And the idea that hotel room just happens to be sitting over top of that well is kind of a creepy idea too, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
So, all the pieces here. Brian Cox shows up in the movie. I love me some Brian Cox.
Who's Brian Cox?
He was the guy who commits suicide in the bathtub. Spoilers!
Right.
Towards the end of the movie.
I didn't like that. That was actually part of where I thought one of the weaknesses of the remake. By the way, it's going to sound like I'm being critical. I think this is a solid movie. There are just some choices that seemed overdone. And that was a pretty elaborate suicide get-up that he had for no real reason, and it just seemed like the director was deciding to choose between being subtle and overdoing it in a lot of places, and decided, let's just overdo it. He rigs up this convoluted electrocution contraption that just every it's just too much for me. Like,
But the movie is full of big, broad strokes. That little girl's room at the top of the barn with the impossibly long ladder.
Right.
It seemed like an amazing feat of art direction, but not necessarily real world. But I still kind of liked it.
Right, and that's a product that's exclusively of the remake. Also,
Right.
when we find out that this little girl is born evil and her mother kills her, the scene is kind of too big in the remake for my taste. So when she's strangling her and she's crying and saying, "All I ever wanted was you. Why did you have to do this?" In the original, there's just a flash of this little girl standing by a well and her mother pushing her in, and I thought that understated seemed
Much worse.
It seemed just so much more elegant to me.
Yeah.
In the way that the ghost in the original seemed more elegant to me.
But I like this bait and switch because we see the woman in the tape, so we associate the evil with her.
Right.
And she murders this child. She is bad. So Naomi Watts interprets it the same way we do, and she, finds the body in the well and releases the spirit, as it were. And I think that's the other big payoff, the thing that really worked for me in the movie. I remember watching this in the theater, and she's out of the well, and they're in the car, and I was like looking at my wife, and I was like, uh-oh. Well, the credits haven't rolled, so something bad is going to happen, because everything is nicely wrapped up, right? Well, no, this wasn't a sweet, innocent little girl. As you said, she is very evil, and by letting her out, she has really unleashed this evil upon the world. And
although that was another question, and this not a product of the remake. Maybe a little bit, because there's that kid that's maybe a little bit overly precocious, that at the end says to his mom, "Why did you let her out of the well? That's what she wanted the whole time." Well, I mean,
you should have mentioned that at some point.
Well, not just that, but why? What's going to get worse? People that see this tape are still going to die when they see the tape.
Well, we find out that she'll be able to follow them, because in spite of the fact that they move, she tracks them down for the ring too.
I don't think that was I think they wrote the ring 2 on the fly.
Yeah.
All they had to know at the end of this one was copy the tape and show it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Well, they could do that.
But the little ghost was no longer stuck in that well. She could be wherever she wanted to be.
Well, she's going to be wherever the tape is, right? This
Right.
tape is going to be infinitely copied.
Right.
So it doesn't seem like things have gotten worse or better. Things end on kind of something between a shitty note and a hopeful note.
Yeah. They crack the code on how to avoid getting killed by watching the videotape, but the price that implies is a pretty steep one, right?
Why? What?
Because if you show the tape to somebody else, you're off the hook.
Yeah, so
but if you show the tape to somebody else, they'll die.
Yeah, so show it to a pedophile.
Well, I thought, could you just agree to watch the tape once a week and pass it back and forth between two people?
That would be another way to lawyer. for what's the ghost's name? Anyway, that would be a way to lawyer the ghost, just to keep passing it back and forth. Friday night is ring night.
Indeed. But God help you if you miss a week.
Yeah.
I don't care who was sick where. You better make time for this. It's like a 5-minute video at best. Right? Overall, I think I like it. Works more than it doesn't. And the fact that it's a little bit dated, it's just, I think, speaking to how quickly films are starting to get dated, really. It's not an ancient film. What year was this? Like 98 or something?
No, it's from the 2000s.
2003. Look at that. See, it's like 11 years old, and it feels like it's this relic. It's strange.
Yeah, because it's so early 2000s in a way that, having just recently come from that, I think it's before nostalgia for the early 2000s is kicked in. So right now it's dated before it's had a chance to be retro, which is maybe like some of the aesthetic that I have a bigger problem with now than I had before. Maybe it's just because it's that age where it's hard to... the way 80s were so bad in the early 90s, but now in the 2000s, 80s are kind of cool in their way again.
Yeah.
And that's happened forever. One of the things that I thought was really good, there was a scene, and this is a product of the remake, there was a scene on a ferry where a horse freaks out around Naomi Watts because she's been cursed. And the whole scene was pretty good, but then the horse freaks out and runs off the ferry and hits its head and breaks it, and that whole scene was very visceral, and then gets dragged into the propeller.
And it's not random. They establish it well in the story that because Samara had to sleep in the barn, it kept the horses up, that they were disturbed by her presence and started acting weird, and eventually ended up running themselves off of cliffs.
Right.
Stuff.
Yeah, and her mother really loved horses, so that was another way to...
So it wasn't just like a, what the fuck was that sequence? It was weirdly set up. And, points. And it also, I think, for me, it was the first time I remember seeing it, that weird ghost face. When we saw a flash of what the victims of Samara looked like, they looked weirdly saturated with water, screaming mouth ghost face.
Yeah.
That image would be appropriated by ghost movie after ghost movie after ghost movie after this. But I'm pretty sure, to my memory, this was the first place I saw it anyway.
Maybe. I mean, that's something that the original had.
Had as well, yeah.
Yeah, it was a little bit different.
A little bit more computery in this version, I think, yeah.
And this review, I'm sounding like one of those awful people that is against remakes or, is complaining about every choice. When I first saw this, I thought these two movies side to side were really interesting for me because I thought the remake added more interesting elements that weren't present in the original, but the original was more viscerally scary. Now I do actually think that there's sort of a bigness to this, a high budget DreamWorks movie, that the shots are good, the acting's good, everything's good. Thank God Naomi Watts didn't forget to have that scene where she walks around in her underwear for reasons that have nothing to do with the plot. It just didn't work that well as a ghost movie to me. It would have worked, like, it just wasn't all that scary. I thought it was a little bit overworked in that.
I like the mythology. I thought it did have a creepy thing, and creepy little kid things are kind of fairly, familiar, and I thought they did the creepy little kid thing well.
Yeah.
So I'll give points to that. And the twist, it wasn't like the Sixth Sense, slap my forehead, holy shit. I did see it coming just by nature of the movie progressing beyond that point. but then
that actually kind of means you didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, the twist in this, I thought was... I mean, the first time that I had seen it, it sort of blew my mind, right? Because the whole movie had been about... giving this...
Solving this puzzle.
Solving the murder or solving whatever happened, and then giving the victim a proper burial. And so many ghost movies follow that.
You find the bones in the attic, bury them, problem solved.
Yeah, and then this movie just really makes you think, well, why do we trust that convention so much?
No, the real answer is just to leave the ghost the fuck alone if you can.
Yeah.
I get tired of hearing myself sing the praises of Guillermo del Toro, and I do think that his last film was a little bit of a misstep, I gotta admit.
What was his last film?
Pacific Rim.
Oh, I just watched that with my neighbor and we fast forwarded through everything that wasn't a fight scene.
Yeah, see, it's simultaneously awesome and stupid at the same time, but that may be a conversation for another day. This is really, I think, solid as a rock ghost movie called The Devil's Backbone. It concerns a little boy who was orphaned by the Spanish Civil War and sent to this creepy as shit orphanage. And the new world life that he's introduced to is, of course, hard and difficult to adjust to, but it is further complicated by the presence of a ghost. A ghost of a small child, who's just, the visual on it is so wonderfully rendered.
Yeah, the CGI works really well on that. I keep complaining about CGI in ghost stuff.
In this case, absolutely 100%.
And I think mostly because it was classical effects, like mostly it was makeup, and then I think they just CGI blurred some bubbles around him, so he always looked like he was underwater.
Yeah, because as we find out, his fate, and that seems pretty obvious, his fate was that he was thrown into a vat of water. His body was lost into this vat of water. I'm going to just put my cards on the table right away and say that I'm a huge fan of this movie. I really like it. And how much do I like it? It's the one movie in which I have bitched about it in the last episode, where a character is killed off and his ghost shows up to save the day. Pisses me off. There's an element of that plot conceit to this movie, but I still give it a pass because the journey is so good, and the stakes, the peril of this adventure that this little boy has himself, like, you think it's bad after the first 15 minutes or so, but the stakes just get higher and worse and tougher for this little kid as it goes on. It's amazing.
Yeah, I had forgotten how many children died in this.
Oh yeah, man. Like it is rated 18A, and it earns it.
Yeah. I think as far as your whatever the equivalent of Deus Ex Machina is, but with ghosts, the reason it worked so well in this, there are two sort of scenes at the end where ghosts help out these kids, and one of them, they're locked in a room and somebody who's
needs
a ghost
to open a door,
lets them out, and I think it just wasn't, like, that wasn't the climactic saving their life or anything. If that hadn't happened, they probably would have died.
Yeah.
But it wasn't this big build up to that, and actually we thought, or no, we didn't think it. They thought that somebody else had opened the door for them. I guess it was obvious to us.
Yeah, the kid who had brutally broken his foot.
Yeah, that was an awful scene.
Oh, Jesus. I hate even talking about it.
And then there was a scene at the end where they push the bad guy into the pool where the ghost kid gets him.
Yeah.
But they were corralling him there anyway. That was always their plan, to get him there. So that wasn't really Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah.
So I think you may still be able to complain about that thing where somebody dies and comes back as a ghost to save him, because this was subtle about it.
Yeah.
Or not. It wasn't
and
over the top.
The whole movie wasn't building up to that point. It was, in a way, just sort of a plot point.
Yeah.
And everything around it, like I say, was so good. One question that I will have to ask about this movie, we recently did Have Yourself a Scary Little Christmas, and we talked about rare exports.
Right.
And I proposed this question. Who is this movie for?
Us. I think we're the perfect demographic.
Absolutely. For it. But, like, ostensibly, when I see a horror movie that has, like, a little kid in the center of it, I think it's like a PG movie, you know? Like, that it's gonna... He'll be in scary situations, but everything's gonna work out okay for him. And like I say, this movie starts with everything not being fucking okay with him. He's being dropped off at this orphanage and in deep denial about the fact that his father has died. You don't get dropped off at the orphanage if, you know, Daddy's coming to pick you up any day, right?
Yeah, and actually the person that brings him there is his tutor, who's also a resistance fighter in the Spanish Civil War. And he thinks that they're just there for a few minutes, so his tutor doesn't say goodbye. He just hops in a car and drives away, and the little kid runs as fast as he can to catch the car, and he can't do it. And it's like, okay, well, you live here now.
Yeah. Brutal.
Yeah.
And then it gets worse.
Yeah. It's also another rare movie where it's a child protagonist that isn't too precocious and isn't irritating, and it doesn't take away from the movie.
Yeah. Beautiful set pieces. The scene in the rain where he sees the bomb drop.
Yeah.
And a dud happily just crunching down just before his feet. It seems like ridiculous to describe, but it's rendered so well. Like, the storytelling at work here is fine, and there's a lot of archetypes, you know. The bad guy is really, really bad, you know, and the sort of fatherly schoolmaster is really, really good, you know.
Although there's also interesting depth to the characters, like the schoolmaster and the woman that runs the orphanage. Obviously he's been in love with her forever, but
she's got the hollow leg.
Yeah, she's screwing this really handsome young guy whom she knew as a child at the orphanage, and he grew up there. But things like the old guy that's all perfect, he's also impotent. They make just a few subtle comments about the fact that his penis doesn't work, and this is this weakness that he's really ashamed of. I don't know, I would say there's a cowardliness to his character, but there's a fear to his character. So he goes into town and he sees because he's sympathetic to the resistance, he sees some resistance fighters being shot by a firing squad, among them the tutor to the boy who dropped him off. And you just get a sense from this old guy, like he could have been like a hero poet of the resistance, but he just didn't have the courage to be able to do it.
And it's very subtly drawn into it. I also have to, like, it's subtitled, so I sort of feel the performances. I don't know exactly the all the ticks and hums of the deliveries, I guess, but all of the kids felt so damn authentic to me.
Yeah.
Even like the fact that they sort of corralled and went exploring, looking for this ghost, made sense. Sort of the strength in numbers aspect. Once like they convince themselves that the ghost is real, they kind of Hardy Boy up in a believable way.
Yeah.
A lot of times you just like, no fucking kid would do that. It's the whole Elliot going towards the creepy noise in the shed, in E.T. That's not what a kid would do. The kid would run and get his big brother and all the other kids to come out and see what was going on, but we needed this to happen.
Well, also there was sort of a power struggle between the kid and the kid who was like the oldest of the orphan children.
The established orphans, yeah.
Yeah, and they have this scene kind of towards the beginning where they have to go get water from the kitchen, and this is like, it's believable in that way when you're a kid and you're doing a commando raid down to the kitchen because you're having a sleepover, but they're also both scared because they're scared of the one guy who was like the guy who turns out to be the bad guy.
The big bad of the movie, yeah.
They're scared, well, the younger one will be scared of catching a beating from that guy. The older one saw that guy murder another kid, or manslaughter another kid, so he's scared of being killed by him, and they're both kind of scared of this ghost that they think exists, but they're not quite sure. And so there's a lot of dynamics between those two kids together, and in that scene, and the way that the shots are drawn out, and the sound effects are really good, and just everything is done so meticulously. And that kitchen looks like such a 1930 poor orphanage kitchen. Yeah, everything about that set was great.
The reality was never broken. Like, the special effects are not always 100%, but I was never like, bullshit. I was never taken out of it. I was always glued to it. It holds me in a way that I don't think I could compare to any of the other movies in this list. So, for that, huge points. I also think it's interesting the sort of the discovery the kids have. They're obviously, as I kept on saying, in a harsh world, but part of what they're fearing and what the adventure is sort of them sort of getting a glimpse of the real adult world. As hard as their child world is going to be, they're growing up into an even harder adult world. And that's when they're confronted with things like they shouldn't see, like the sex.
Yeah.
Or, the harshness of, the adult world when they're not putting the big musical smiley face on in front of the kids. What they see about the adults behind closed doors is as sort of troubling as anything else to them.
Yeah. And historically, like, they're growing up into the adult world in about the worst time to be doing this in Spain, because at the end they escape the orphanage and they're hobbling away. Well, the next town is, I don't know.
Not much safer.
Yeah, and it's not close. Like, it's a 12-hour walk, and one of them, his foot's all broken up, and it's in the hot sun, and there's some question about whether or not they could make it, and if they did, the Spanish Civil War is still going on.
Like, who's going to have room for 20 orphans? Yeah.
And then, even if they survive that, they can catch a breath and be old enough to be conscripted to fight in World War II a few years later. Like, things are not getting better for these kids. So the fact that they don't die, it's not really exactly a happy ending.
We certainly don't wish them death.
Yeah. They toughen up a little bit, but it's hard to say. Like, I don't know that there's really a moral or a lesson to the movie. Maybe something about sticking together and never giving up. Yeah. Something trite like that. But I don't know. It's they get through this really tough stuff, but their life is really bleak. And the last shot is them walking across these barren. I don't know if it would be described as a desert or a plain or something.
Yeah.
But they're not
to an uncertain future. It's like a Dawn of the Dead ending almost.
Yeah, they're not in really great shape.
Yeah, but like it does feel like a weird, insanely hard and dark, considering it concerns children, like coming of age horror story. And that's pretty ambitious. So once again, I gotta continue to give big old props to Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah,
I cannot endorse The Devil's Backbone enough. Really.
My only note, I made notes for all of these movies, but I couldn't really make notes for this. I just wrote, there's really nothing wrong with this movie. There's almost nobody I wouldn't recommend it to.
Yeah, even if you're not a horror fan, I think like this movie would appeal to people who would, they could be surprised by it. You know?
I mean, it's marginally not as great as Pan's Labyrinth, but
that's a high mark. Yeah. Like, Pan's Labyrinth is pretty effing fantastic.
Yeah.
So
that's not... Yeah.
No criticism there. Great double feature. So there it was, 6 more ghost movies ranked, just like that. Well, I don't know. Is this the one? Is this the one where we go 6 for 6? I'm excited.
I don't think
you
it
don't
is.
Think so?
I don't think it is.
Well, hit me, man.
Because I have a feeling that we disagreed on what the one that I keep referring to is obviously the weakest one of these, which is The Haunting in Connecticut.
Right.
Which I suspect you will think is the second weakest. I didn't see the point. I thought it was derivative. I got this sense that somebody had learned of the fact that Victorians took death photos, because there's some that pop up on the internet,
right?
The weird things that
Victorians did.
Somebody just saw those and saw a picture of somebody with ectoplasm. There's some photos of that, and thought, I'll base a movie around that, and then didn't bother to go any further. I just thought it just had really nothing going for it. It wasn't all that awful, but there's no reason to see it. Number 2, I would put Poltergeist. It will always be number 1 in my heart, but I didn't... That's another one I think we're going to disagree about.
Wow.
It didn't seem as timeless as number 3, which was Hell House, which there were some real... Like, I don't know that I would recommend it for everybody, but I really enjoyed watching it.
Right.
There were some parts that I thought were a little bit clumsy, but, what are you going to do? It's 40 years old, and it's came from a different time, and they had different technological considerations, and also different social constraints.
Yeah.
I thought they did a pretty good job. And also, most of my comments for The Legend of Hell House, I just have Pamela Franklin, who played the psychic Florence Tanner. I've just got her name with a bunch of hearts.
She is pretty, isn't she?
Matthew Franklin. And that, I mean, I hate that gave it points, but that gave it points. I liked seeing her on screen. Ring, I would recommend to almost everybody, although I thought the original, although slower, the remake of The Ring, I thought just felt a little bit too much in places. I didn't think it was... I thought it would have been helped out by a little bit more subtlety. That said, I'm being hard on a movie that is genuinely a very solid B. Like, I would give it a solid B.
Yeah.
It did a good
Considering
job.
the 12 other ghost movies that we have reviewed, The Ring, I think, is pretty fucking solid.
Yeah, well, I mean, even... I was just trying to remember. In my first list, there was a Callista Flockhart movie that I thought might be better than Haunting in Connecticut. But other than that, of the 6 before this, or the 12 before this, still my worst one is better than the best.
High praise.
Next is The Innkeepers, which could have made it to the top of my list if Devil's Backbone weren't such a perfect movie.
Yeah.
There was a quirkiness about The Innkeepers that wasn't shitty and wasn't forced. The characters were really likable, but not likable in that they were trying too hard. The movie was charismatic, and also it was scary in parts, and although there wasn't a paradigm shift type twist, the ending was satisfactory, or satisfying. I guess satisfactory seems like low praise. I don't know that everybody would love The Innkeepers. I don't know that everybody would like it as much as I did, but I quite liked it. But The Devil's Backbone.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Guillermo, man. Fucking Guillermo.
Yeah.
Well, once again, we're not going 6 for 6 at all here. I regret to inform you, but we agree in places that I'm happy to hear that we agree on, because I was kind of worried that we might not. But you're right, I did put The Legend of Hell House in 6th place, but you know what might really have killed me on this is just like, the movie is just never the book, and I like the book, you know? So I might have brought too much personal baggage to it.
Yeah.
It's fine. Like I said, I do think I mentioned that there's some unintentional humor to it, and I do think that's there. I think at this point you might have to take a little bit of the melodrama on the chin, but it's a good Coles Notes version of the book, and if it's your gateway drug to Matheson, by all means, check out The Legend of Hell House. There are much worse ghost movies than that, but in this bunch I put it in 6th place. The Haunting in Connecticut I put in 5th place for its complete okayness. It is completely adequate. in 4th place is where Poltergeist washed up to me. Again, nostalgia goes a long way for me. Like I have genuine affection for the movie, and the charming Disney stuff, as sort of distracting and cavity inducing as they may be, works. Like you say, we like this family, we're on their side, and you know, it's an 80s blockbuster light show spectacle that it still gives good movie this many years later. It's in 4th position.
Yeah.
I endorse it.
It's a classic. It's one that should be in the Library of Congress. As I think it actually probably is.
I wouldn't be surprised.
An important movie. Yeah.
All right. So going into the top 3, all the way in 3rd place, I put The Ring. Again, Gore Verbinski impressed me as a director. I really liked Mouse Hunt, I really liked The Ring, and I was really depressed that he spent like the next 8 years of his career doing these stupid Pirates of the Caribbean movies, you know. But yeah, the twist works. The ghostly little kid is creepy. The stakes that the movie set up, you know, are really good. You got 7 days to solve this puzzle or you will die. And now you have to solve the puzzle for yourself and your son. And now, you know, you've let the ghost go, but the ghost is still a problem. Like, you're constantly getting more piling on to raise things. And, I don't know. Solid remake. And, you know, you don't say that as often as I would like to. There are good remakes, but there are many more shitty remakes.
Yeah.
So, points to that. This is the one I thought I was going to be in shit for. In 2nd place, I do put The Innkeepers, but I absolutely agree with you when you say this is not necessarily for everybody. In fact, if there's a film that's going to polarize audiences anywhere in this group, it's probably this one. I can see if it catches you on the wrong day, or if you're looking for a little bit more of a roller coaster ride, people finding this movie tedious. But if you're willing to meet this movie halfway, if you know, get into the character and the atmosphere, it earns its scares, and because of that, although there may be fewer in them than you're used to in a horror movie, the ones that come really work. So yeah, I continue to be a fan of Ty West. But Guillermo del Toro, I mean, holy shit, man. Holy shit, dude. This another sort of child fairy tale, and I totally get why he calls it a companion piece to Pan's Labyrinth, because it's another child in a horrible environment who somehow, you know, struggles to persevere. It's an R-rated ghost story, but I would encourage everyone to watch it. And it's one of the, you know, everybody's heard of Pan's Labyrinth, but I don't think everyone's caught The Devil's Backbone. So once again, it seems like default, you know, rank number 1, Guillermo. I think almost every time he comes up, he ranks high. I think Mimic's the only time he didn't claim the prize with me.
Well,
so
it's
far.
only because you haven't ranked Hellboy movies, or at least the second one.
Yes.
It's not very good.
Hellboy 2, the less good one. Right. So yeah, thank you so much.
This, I thought, would be the time I really wanted to beat my nemesis, Karen Giese, whom I've never met, but I've heard her on this podcast, and I know she listens to all of them, so just so you know, I'm coming to get you.
Shit just got real.
was going to I was trying to decide between ranking the movies in the order that I liked them or the order that I thought Larry would, so I could defeat you. I went with my heart, but I've written down what I thought Larry would rank.
House, Connecticut, Poltergeist, Ring, Innkeepers, Devil's Backbone. You are correct, sir.
So, damn my noble spirit.
Until we genuinely agree, you're not going to take the
That's
championship.
Right.
But, maybe I'll give you a consolatory prize of some kind here. And episode 40 is done. It's just like that. It's over with. It's finished. No more. But I'm guessing Matthew shall be back, and again, discussing the subject of ghosts. He's a very focused, one-track mind kind of dude. I'd like to thank him again for his time. He was in for the holidays and probably shouldered out some family time to get this podcast done for me. So thanks, Matt. And thanks everyone else out there in podcast land listening to this, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. I appreciate you listening to this podcast. And I hope you keep doing it. This is your host and random Canadian, Larry Parsons, saying, until next time.